Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Max from the Finksburg Library at Carroll County Public Libraries. I'm here today presenting Plant This, Not That, Round 2, a second iteration of my Plant This, Not That PDF. I'm a avid gardener and interested in native plants, conservation, and just making the environment a lot better and also making it a little easier for gardeners to get into it. I love landscaping. I do it at home. I'm slowly getting into Finksburg's gardens here at the library. And a lot of people think, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. And it's like, you can integrate Native American plants that make it not look wild, so to speak. A lot of our preconceived notions about gardening and planting are a bit out of date, and it's very fun to explore this. So I'm very excited. Let's get started. All right. So Plant This, Not That, Eastern U.S. Native Alternatives for Common Gardening Plants. And this is for traditional old-fashioned gardening plants and then invasives. So first, some information, like why native plants? Don't all shrubs, trees, and flowers help wildlife? Like, yes and no. Not all introduced garden plants help our native wildlife the way they need. Some wildlife do not recognize them as useful compared to species they evolved alongside here in North America for over thousands of years. Some common garden landscape plants like ginkgo trees, while they make for excellent no-care ornamentals, they're basically living statuary with limited to no wildlife value. Other plants may be attractive, but in terms of their nutritional content, either via nectar or pollen, they can also be low. Butterfly bush is a good example. This is all really important to consider, like our ornamentals either contributing or not contributing to nutrition and shelter, because in the US there are about 11 million acres, 111 million acres of designated wilderness left for wildlife. That's a little over only 5% of the US landmass, most of which is in Alaska. It's just 2% of all land across the lower 48 states. The rest is all developed as cities, farms, suburban residential and commercial spaces with forests and wild areas speckled in between. Of that 95%, the US has about 4 million miles of asphalt roads, not including 3,590 plus square miles of parking lots. There's additionally 40 million acres of turf grass in the US, covering 1.9% of the total land. Most of this was more wilderness, cultivated native space by Native Americans, or more wildlife-friendly family farms, just 250 to 100 years ago or less. Also woodlands and other plains and prairies. By replacing remaining native plants with cultivated non-native plants, we're further breaking up habitats and reducing availability of host plants. Non-native plants can become invasive and escape into the wild, further displacing and destroying remaining small pockets of native flora. I just noticed just some formatting on this is a little off. Just be assured this will be available as a PDF for people, and the formatting in there should be fine. So what's at stake? Due to lack of native plants, invasive garden escapees, pesticides, herbicides, lawn care, our birds, butterflies, bats, and beneficial insect populations are crashing. Do you remember your car grill in the summer? Do you remember how many bugs used to be on it when you used to drive around? Take a look at it this summer, aside from the cicadas, and take a look at at your lights at night. See how much less bugs there used to be than what there used to be. Monarch butterflies have declined by 80% over a 20-year average since the 70s and 80s due to deforestation in Mexico, where they overwinter, and the US border, and then the lack of milkweed, its host wildflower in the US, which used to be all over in prairies. and fields and meadows in the East Coast. Wild bee abundance shows declines of roughly 23% across the US from 2008 to 2013 and up to 90% depending on species. This is not honeybees. These are often solitary or wild bees. And they do actually a lot of our native pollinating, and will also pollinate fruit trees as well. The number of birds in the United States and Canada have declined by 3 billion or 2.29% since 1970. This is on top of 365 to 988 million birds dying from crashing into windows due to light pollution annually in just the US. And this is during their migration periods, so like now in the spring and then also later in the fall. Migratory birds, 2.5 billion migratory birds lost since 1970. 2 in 5 Baltimore Orioles have been lost since 1970. And there's been a negative almost 30% population loss in migratory bird species. Eastern forest birds, 6 in 10 wood thrushes have been lost since 1970. 170 million eastern forest birds lost. That's a negative 17 population loss. And this is mostly due to also just development. Wow. So that's kind of scary. These are kind of like, dry, scary facts. So what we can do to help? Immediate results to help wildlife. Stop broadly spraying insect foggers and insecticides, including systemic insecticides found in certain 3-in-1 plant and lawn fertilizers and fungicides. Stop broadly spraying herbicide. Always read labels and use alternative natural or controlled methods, such as painting herbicide to stump application. Do not plant possible host plants treated with systemic insecticides. Ask the commercial nursery that you purchase from if they utilize systemics on their plants. Keep fallen leaves and some sticks on the ground each fall, or keep chopped leaves in loose piles to provide cover. Reduce turf grass by connecting solo trees and shrubs into larger habitat beds. Kind of more on this later. Reduce light pollution and install bird-saving crash deterrents. Install bird and bat houses in proper locations. Petition for more natural spaces. Get involved in your community. Natural spaces preserves and concrete removal for tree plantings along streets from local HOA and county governments. Encourage environmental initiatives, like get involved. Consider buying a hybrid or totally electric car or utilizing public transport if possible. So, and all, if you plant it, they will come. The surprising thing about our wildlife is that it's very resilient. If you do plant certain things in very quick succession, things will return. Here are some bad guys to look out for. These are some rampant weeds and invasives that are currently affecting our landscapes, and you might be familiar with them from your garden. One that I've been seeing more and more of is porcelain berry. It looks very similar to wild grape, but the berries are this very brilliant shades of blue and purple. There's also oriental bittersweet that chokes. Stiltgrass is an annual. It's very, very tenacious because it can do thousands of seeds. But since it's an annual, it also can be easy to control, and it's also easy to pull. So if you can stop it from going to seed, it will not come back in a certain area, as long as there's no more seeds of its kind in the soil. Knotweed is a very big problem. Mile a minute, another scrambling weed. Honeysuckle, old-fashioned honeysuckle, even though it smells great, it really just takes over everything. Same thing with English ivy. We'll talk more about this later. And then there's also lesser celandine. It's invading our woodlands, and it's a very pretty ground cover in the woodlands with little yellow flowers right now in spring. Ooh, but it also is choking out a lot of our native spring plants and ferns. So here is, we're going to be getting into our don't plant or plant. And you're gonna see a bunch of butterflies on corners of some of these plants, and those are actually following some research by via Doug Tellamy. They are how many butterflies and moths species it can support. So common garden plants that we want to really start getting away from in our landscapes are burning bush, Japanese barberry, and heavenly bamboo. They're very pretty, they're very hardy, and very tough shrubs, but they are invading our woodlands. Even around here, if you go and step into your woods, chances are you're going to see a wild version of probably a barberry. In some spots, lots of burning bush as well. Has very distinctive little wings on their branches. So we're going to get into some native alternatives. So in going with the theme of the very red foliage, most of these choices are all very red, have very red foliage, or have a feature of red sometime during the season. And the first two that I'm going to talk about are actually aronia. There's two species. There's a black, and then there's also a red type with berries that describes the berries. They have flowers in spring, beautiful fall foliage, and then also berries. They make good 3 to 4 season kind of shrub. We also have 9 bark, which can support up to 37 host for butterflies and moths. It's a very big plant, but from a distance, the new dwarf hybrids, particularly the lime green ones, support wildlife more than the purple, but does come in a bevy of colors, and they, from a distance, look very similar to barberry, but their foliage is actually soft, and unlike barberry, does not have thorns. So they're a very great replacement for that. We also have an evergreen called dog hobble or fetterbush, Lakothaway. It's a very pretty evergreen. It's in the family as like a Kalima, mountain laurel, and rhododendrons, and also Japanese Andromeda, Pyrrhus, if you're familiar with it. It has a very arching and scrambling kind of form, and it's very, very pretty, used underneath taller shrubs, and forms a very good foundation evergreen. Does like it a little sheltered and likes it shady. There's also Virginia sweetspire, which are these two right here. Again, really brilliant fall coloring, and then also mid-spring, early summer flowers, very fragrant white flowers in sprays, and this can be planted in sun or shade. We also have fragrant sumac. There's 2 types. There's a ground cover type called Grow Low, and then there's also a big bushier type called Lacette, which has small, tiny foliage. So it has a really nice effect that can also kind of fill the niche for larger barberries or the kind of bamboo, heavenly bamboo. Tends to have really pretty fall foliage, as you can see here. Very fragrant foliage. It is trifoliate. It does look, it's not poisonous at all, but it does have a trifold leaf, very similar to poison ivy, but it is a very good ground cover and very good shrub. And then over here with whopping 111 butterflies and moths supporting it are the viburnums. And there are various species that you can utilize, from nudum to lintango, the nannyberry, prunifolium, and dentatum, that are native to this area. They're very pretty. Lintago and prunifolium can be used very similar to almost like a crepe myrtle in terms of their form, and they tend to have brilliant fall coloring. And then berries, and some of these are actually edible for humans. Same thing with aronia, but they generally need to be cooked. All right, so we have alternatives for butterfly bush and Japanese spirea, which are also escaping cultivation. Butterfly bush has improved in terms of not setting seed, but in terms of nutrition, it's probably lacking. So we have lots of different options here. There is native Anise hyssop. There's a native to the East Coast type of blue hyssop. There are some hybrids of it: blue fortune, blackadder, dark towers, and purple haze. They're very easy to care for. Butterflies love them. There's buttonbush. This is a very big bush. It likes moist places, and it blooms in these very odd Sputnik-looking flowers. They're very very structural, very interesting conversation piece. The big species gets very big. You can use it for screening. But there's also newer dwarf cultivars that are available. We also have Culliver's root. Culliver's root is a very big perennial that can kind of resemble butterfly bush with the purple flowers. They send out these big, long, white or these kind of purple panicles. And interestingly enough, cultivar lavender towers supported wildlife better than the straight species when in a study. So it's a very big plant. It gets up to about 5 to 6 feet tall, if possible, 4 to 6. Very structural for the back of the border. And basically anywhere where you want to put a larger butterfly bush, you could put this there. We also have Clethra. It's another summer blooming bush, a little shorter, blooms in little sprays, and very fragrant, likes it either wet or dry, and also blooms later when things from the spring have faded. So it's a really nice kind of bridge for late summer. There's also meadowsweet, steeplebush. These are actually relatives of this Japanese variety, but these are native to the East Coast. They are a very shrubby kind of perennial plant, kind of a subshrub. And they come in either the white or the pink. They like it moist and can be very good for, again, screening or kind of wildlife meadows. We also have a smooth hydrangea. You all know the old-fashioned hydrangea Annabelle with its double flowers. There is a very large flowered native version that actually can support insects and pollinators by feeding it, by having these big pie plate lace cap flowers. And the lace caps can get up to about 10 inches or more in this variety called Haas Halo. And then there's also St. John's wort, which there are surprisingly a few native varieties, Densiflorium prolificum, to this area. And they can support up to 20 host plants. And they bloom little pom-poms. If you're familiar with Hypericum, the non-native type, they bloom with little pom-pom, yellow pom-poms with small little yellow sepals behind them. They kind of look similar to cassia, which we actually will also mention as well later in the presentation. They make very great shrubs. They are very adaptable, love the sun, love it dry, very good for even also moist situations, and can do part shade as well. They're very adaptable and very fun and fragrant. And they are not a nectar plant, but more for pollen. But wild bees particularly really love this plant. All right, so for some evergreens on stuff to avoid, evergreens and or like kind of hedges, there's boxwood. Boxwood isn't necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily good either. We have privet, which is old-fashioned plant that people used to, line their property with or put up against the house. Russian olive, which if you've ever seen a very silver plant in a field with red berries, it is most likely Russian olive or bush honeysuckle. And then also skip laurels, which are not bad, but also could be a little more supportive. Again, Leucothaway is a good suggestion. You can use it in a lot of places where skip laurel could be used. It's not a very tall plant, but it has the bonus of these little beautiful flowers, as you can see here, that bloom along very much like Pyrrhus, and likes the shade and moist areas. In the fall, it does blush. It tends to blush kind of ruby to purple colors, and then you'll have often coppery new growth. It does also come in a variegated variety, which makes it really fun to plant in shady spots because it brightens it up. We also have inkberry holly. This is a variety of holly that has little blackberries instead of red, and it very much resembles boxwood. You can use it pretty much anywhere where boxwood would be, except maybe in really, really hot areas, like really baking hot. You might not be able to use it as much, but it's fairly adaptable and easy to grow, and very mimics the appearance of boxwood fairly well. And then you can also shear it into little balls. There's also what I would suggest is either bayberry, Myrca pennsylvanica, and then also the southern one, wax myrtle. These are two, you'd see them on the Eastern Shore a lot, but they make perfectly fine plants for our regular gardens. They're semi-evergreen to evergreen. The southern wax myrtle tends to keep its leaves a bit more. The bayberry tends to drop them, but they're both semi-evergreen. They'll cling to their leaves pretty late. And as our Decembers have gotten fairly mild, at least lately, they wouldn't brown too bad until then. Or in some cultivars of the southern one, you won't get any scorch at all. They tend to be very fast growing in some situations, so they make for also very good screening options as well. And then we have also vines. Vines are very popular. As we mentioned before, honeysuckle and English ivy are very tenacious. In particular, English ivy likes to climb trees, and it tends to girdle and or really affects their performance. So if you have a lot of English ivy growing up a tree, and you really don't want it on in there, you can cut it off about 3 to 4 feet off the ground. You can cut it and cut a big window, like a rectangle, across the entire vines, making sure not to cut too much into the bark of the tree. And then you can paint. I mentioned before not using herbicides in terms of spraying, but for a lot of things, you can cut and then paint the open wound on the vine, and that'll actually kill it because it'll send the poison all the way down to the root, like vine and stump killer. And you can apply that with a little play paintbrush. So I really recommend doing that. It helps really save your trees from being toppled over or overwhelmed. Other problem ones are Chinese or Japanese wisteria, very strong growers, very, very stubborn vines, also very constricting. And then we also have sweet autumn clematis, which is very beautiful, but it is very smothering. Various suggestions here. Native includes trumpet honeysuckle. It's a very pretty, it's not fragrant, but it is a very pretty bright coral red to yellow color or orange, and grows very nicely. Maypop, passion flower, is surprisingly common, or rather native to the East Coast, especially the more south you go. But it is from the area and also makes for a decent screening as well. We have American wisteria, which is less vigorous than the Chinese and Japanese, but it's still a wisteria. It has smaller little flower panicles, so it's a little different looking. But there is a variety, I believe it's called Amethyst Falls, that is wildly available. We also have Dutchman's pipe, which is a very interesting vine, and that has these beautiful heart-shaped leaves. If you like ginger ground covers or are familiar with ginger ground covers, these resemble it. They have very big heart-shaped leaves, and also produce these wonderful little fleshy flowers that look like pipes, hence the name Dutchman pipe. They are a host plant for a butterfly pipe vine swallowtail. Very, very unique to that. Virginia creeper, that's another, some people mistake it for poison ivy a lot. It has 5 panicles, 5 lobed leaves, forms a brilliant red color in fall, and is shiny and green throughout the whole year. It's a very popular, actually, plant in Europe, where it's not native, for, as you can see here, on buildings. We tend to not like it here, but I think it's definitely worth playing around with more. There's also trumpet vine, which is can be fairly aggressive. It grows sticking to things, so you want to put it on a structure that can handle it being stuck to. Blooms in the summer in these brilliant red flowers, oversized honeysuckle flowers. No fragrance, but again, really pretty. Draws in hummingbirds. And also comes in yellow and orange. And then we also have Virgin's Bower, a kind of replacement for the sweet autumn. I do believe it blooms at a different time, and smaller, little, simpler white flowers. Very pretty. Again, all of these are vines, though, so they are vigorous. Are they as invasive and vigorous as the invasives? In some cases, actually, they can be just as tenacious, and that's a good thing. But you also have to realize that you need to have the space to use them in. For a lot of garden spaces, the trumpet honeysuckle actually is probably a good bet, because it tends to stay, even though it's very vigorous, it tends to stay fairly compact. All right, so pollinator parade. Here are various plants that are great for pollinators, attracting pollinators to your gardens, and they're all native. And again, got some formatting issue here, but no worries. So I'll just go over them all if you can't see. We have goldenrod, which can boast and support over 126 moths and butterflies as a host plant and feeder. We also have mountain mint, very great pollinator plant. A lot of pollinators really love mountain mint and will flock to it when it's in bloom. There are a few species, and it's starting to get a lot easier to find at places. We also have lobelia, cardinal flower, very popular plant for hummingbirds and butterflies. Very big hummingbird plant, likes it a little moist, can handle part shade. There's a species, the species is probably your best bet for attracting and supporting wildlife the best, but there's also black truffle, a variety that in studies was comparable to the species. Sometimes cultivars that you buy, and we'll talk about this in a second, sometimes don't support or have the way they're supposed to. There's also Joe Pyeweed, Bondset, Eupatorium. It's been going by the name Eutrochium, a little different. There's various cultivars and garden species available. A lot of them are native to the East Coast, so really, if you do a hodgepodge of them, they're very good. Big plants, very pretty, fleshy purple to pink to white flowers with lots of nectar for the pollinators, and they can support over 35 different moths and butterflies. There's also asters, various native East Coast asters. I really like, there's an aromatic aster. is one such species. They are very hardy. They can resist certain species like aromatic aster can resist like deer and rabbit browsing, and they bloom in late summer to fall. So they are a big, wonderful last hurrah for pollinators as they go into hibernation or are nearing the end of their lives or are about to go travel to somewhere warmer. And some, like aromatic aster, in terms of the size that they get to, they almost look like shrubs. And between the eupatorium and some asters, they make some pretty good replacements for butterfly bush in some situations. We also have Veronia, which is another fall bloomer. It supports over 24 different, as a host plant for over 24 different butterflies and moths. Beautiful purple flowers, and it tends to range in height from fairly short to fairly tall, sprawling plants. Very pretty for the back of the border. Same back of the border plants, various helianthus, sunflower, native sunflowers can support over 71 different, as a host plant for 71 different moths and butterflies. They bloom tend to late summer into fall, so a brilliant sudden, flash of very, very tall plants. And various species are available. There's woodland, there's Maximiliani, and just really great back border plant. We also have Monarda. In studies, Monarda fistulosa. Claire Grace was very good with pollinators. It's also called bergamot. Has very fragrant leaves that you can actually use a little bit of in tea, for an herbal tea, and also a great hummingbird plant. Echinacea, there are a whole study done by Mount Cuba and Pollinator Watch that ranked a lot of the species and cultivars that you're likely to find. A lot of new cultivars of Echinacea, sadly, are not very great at being for wildlife. They're very pretty, but you can easily get carried away and plant ones that tend to not actually help. So do your research. There are the whole study by Mount Cuba and Pollinator Watch is available. Then you can see the breakdown of which one attracted the most. And then we also have Liatris, which is another kind of prairie plant that sends up these wonderful, also called gay rocket, I believe. Beautiful kind of purpley pink flowers and or white. They also attract pollinators fairly quick. And so we also have Butterfly Magic, and this is where I created, again, there is some formatting issue here, but the PDF will not have this version. These are some of the highest butterfly and monarch, not just monarch, supporting host plants that you can plant for our wildlife, for specifically butterflies. Oak, of course, comes in first with over 519 different butterflies and moths. I'm using it as a host plant. Various oak species are native to the East Coast. Grand tree, try to use them wherever you can. If you have a lot of property, at least try to plant at least one oak on your property. You move into a new place, plant an oak tree somewhere on the property. You can't see it very well, but chokecherry, Prunus virginiana, var virginiana, is another workhorse with over 435 host species. It is blooming, I believe, now, and fairly common, very wild kind of tree. But again, if you're looking for screening or something like that, kind of a pretty good choice. We also have, there's also willow species native to the East Coast that supports over 386 varieties of butterfly or moth. We also have varieties of birch, betula, that host over 381 species. And there are also eastern cottonwood, poplus trees that host over 331. And then over in perennials, some of the best that you can plant, surprisingly, is strawberry virginiana, one of the originators, one of the original plants that was crossed to create our culinary strawberries. And then also vesca, two species, support over 77 moths and butterflies. We also have violets, our regular lawn violets, can support up to 32 varieties of pollinators. Lupine, Lupin perennis lineus, it's a blue lupin, supports 28. Surprisingly, a rose mallow, a hibiscus, rose mallow, hibiscus laevis, not to be confused with rose of Sharon, which a lot of people grow and is an invasive, is a marshy kind of loving plant that supports up to 26 cultivar, 26 butterflies. Also, geranium carolinum, robertanium, and maculatum. They are ground cover relatives of famous garden geraniums, and they also support 27 pollinator insects. More butterfly magic. So we have even more here. Again, formatting's a little off, I apologize. More butterfly magic. Of course, we have milkweed, which supports the monarch butterfly. There are two main ones that you tend to find. Butterfly weed, tuberose, and then also there is also swamp milkweed, which is fairly popular and very pretty. Blueberry bushes support over 281 varieties of pollinators. There are lots of native hillside blueberry bushes. So they are definitely something that you want to include in your garden. Milkweed also supports 15 additional pollinators aside from the monarch. We also have tulip poplar. Tulip poplars attract fairly large amounts of pollinators and are a great host plant, very pretty tree. We also have chelone here, turtlehead. It supports the Baltimore checker spot butterfly exclusively. So plant lots of that to see a very small little checkered butterfly come, and they resembles a little bit of our own Maryland flag in terms of the colors. Pawpaw trees and their strange mango-like fruit support support a very specific zebra swallowtail butterfly. We also have spice bush. Spice bush is a beautiful kind of understory bush that you can use. Female plants tend to have red berries in the fall and winter. They have very fragrant leaves, and it supports over 12 pollinators. Host plant with specifically a spice bush swallowtail. There's also golden Alexander. Swallowtails love golden Alexander. It is a distant relative in the carrot family, carrot and fennel, and they love those kind of plants. So they will visit and their caterpillars will utilize those for food. We also have Cassia, as I mentioned, Cassia marylandica and Cassia hebecarpa, two very big, very tropical looking perennials that you can use with ferny foliage that has these yellow flowers, pea-like flowers that attract butterflies and pollinators. Panicum switchgrass is a native grass that you can use in place of miscanthus. There are some varieties called Cloud9 that get very large and are great replacements. That This grass supports over 25 different pollinators. Also, if you have certain fields, pussy toes, Antinaria neglecta, is also a fairly great pollinator supporter. And they send up these little shoots with little fuzzy tops. All right. So, grass by another name. So I mentioned before, a great way to reduce lawn is to connect beds together or to utilize space where you do not walk. A great way to do that is by using carex and sequestering lawn to carex. Americans love lawns, but lawns are hurting wildlife by taking up space and the use of harmful chemicals and poisons to maintain them. All your lawn servicemen. Removing lawn and replacing with native environments is key, but removing lawn can be hard. Where do you even start? Problem areas of your lawn, of your property that struggle or are not walked on, especially in wetter or shadier locations, and in between singular separate trees and shrubs, should be first places to consider when taking steps to reduce lawn coverage. You can take like a rope or your hose and encircle separate trees and shrubs, or map out unused space with a hose, rope, chalk, into new garden beds, either formal, you can go formal, you can go circles, rectangles, or informal organic shapes. Then tear out and smother all, if you have grass, all sod inside. If it's empty already, you're kind of good to go. Just add organic material and plant either wildflowers, ferns, and your carex. The new garden beds can be planted with additional native shrubs, perennials, providing instant habitat and new garden borders for the property. If the appearance of lawn is important due to neighborhood HOA rules or personal preference, like you like the look of grass, most not walked on lawn sod can be replaced with carex. And this is carex over here. This is one species. Carex is a grass-like perennial, also known as sedge. When used in mass, can simulate turf grass without the care and chemicals of lawn upkeep and mowing. Various species are considered semi-evergreen to evergreen, and have many different textures, leaf shapes, and even colors, making a few species a good replacement for liriope and other kind of ground cover edgers too. Various carex can be blended together, either naturally or in formal designs, along with other short native grasses to create modern grass borders, especially for partial shade. Most carex only need to be sheared once a year in spring. Some varieties will stay green all year. Some will turn brown in shade in the wintertime. But they only need to be sheared about once in spring, so that makes them really, really low care. All carex do bloom, providing food for pollinators, especially native butterflies, mostly little skipper butterflies, those little brown ones that tend to fold up their wings, very wedge-shaped, which use the plants as hosts. Carex pennsylvanica, shown to the right, it's a very wispy, very soft version of carex, can host up to 36 species of caterpillars alone. So it is this simple grass can support 36 different species. So I really would recommend consider petitioning HOAs in our neighborhoods and Main Street improvement committees and garden clubs to move towards utilizing carex for public plantings. They're really great for those like medians or places where people aren't walking, and yet why do you have lawn there? I would very much encourage people to think about that and seek carex out for your own yards. All right, and kind of our last slide is also hedgerows. This is property lines and screening for your house. Arborvitae of native thuga, and non-native Asian hybrids have become extremely common for property lines and screening, often replacing old hardwoods and pines. They're cheap, they grow fast, they get big, and are evergreen. Solid plants. However, they're kind of turning into a monoculture. I'm seeing a lot of them being planted, And they're not bad, but there is a more sustainable and supportive way. Like there is an opportunity there in places where people are using them to plant other things and increase biodiversity into a property. So my suggestion is to incorporate more diversity by staggered alternating hedgerows of a few species of trees and shrubs. You could include arborvitae in there, but I wouldn't use it exclusively. Depending on needs, it could even include a hedgerow could even include tall grasses and perennials if you have a short one, or if you need if you like the soft look of grass. An effective hedgerow could conceivably include arborvitae, especially towards the back, but it shouldn't be the only tree utilized. While potentially more expensive up front due to more species being utilized, staggering your plants for property lines actually creates a denser, lush appearance and provides more cover for our wildlife. It also does not have to look wild. You can plant formal patterns too, repeating or mirroring particular combinations. So you can do arborvitae, holly, arborvitae, pine, and then repeat. And if you have multiple layers, you can then play with those layers as well. So I'm giving some suggestions here for evergreen and semi-evergreen trees and shrubs for screening. Red cedar, juniper. The straight species is very variable and can be seen as weedy, but it has a very high wildlife value. Has many cultivars in a variety of colors and sizes for many uses, some comparable to arborvitae and or cypress replacements. Tend to try to plant female cultivars for their blue winter berries for birds. Do not, however, plant near apple trees, as they can cause a symbiotic fungus called cedar apple rust. I would also suggest pines, white pine, Pinus strobus, Virginia pine, Pinus virginiana. There's many cultivars of white pine that can make for very effective screening when used in hedgerows. If you have lots of space, planting a bald cypress or a pond cypress it's a lacy conifer, but that they do lose their needles in the winter. But they would make for a very, very distinct, if you have a lot of space, very distinct large tree for a hedgerow. Also, American holly, classic Christmas holly, plant female cultivars for berries, males for pollinators. Everyone knows what a holly looks like. Beautiful pyramid-shaped tree, great for birds due to the red berries. I would also suggest sweet bay magnolia, Magnolia virginiana. It's a smaller semi-evergreen to evergreen magnolia with smaller white flowers, similar to the southern magnolia, but they have silver undersides to the leaves. It also makes for a good screening plant. And then also southern magnolia. It's a classic southern plant. You can use one as like a focal point. Some cultivars are a little more frost tender, so you have to do your research when selecting your magnolia. I also recommend, again, bayberry and or wax myrtle. They just make for great screening plants and can tolerate a wide variety of conditions, from really sunny and poor sandy soil to clay and semi-shade. Any of the deciduous hardwood trees and shrubs that I presented earlier would work really well in a hedgerow. But I also have suggestions for additional deciduous trees that lose their leaves for your property, either in a hedgerow or just as ornamental place, in the front or elsewhere in the yard. A lot of these are very bushy. The various maples, there's various maple, red maple, silver maple, sugar maple that can be planted, that I encourage. Tilia. Tilia is great pollinator tree. Attracts lots of bees and pollinators. Black tupelo nyssa. It's a beautiful Beautiful, beautiful tree. I really encourage people to plant a lot of those. They're really pretty, 4-season color. We also have hickories. Uh, Hickories are the same family as pecans, and they support wildlife with their nuts. And shagbark hickory, one of the common hickories in this area, has beautiful shaggy bark. It's a very pretty tree. It also supports, tends to support, I believe, the Luna moth. Sourwood is a beautiful, beautiful tree that has, kind of like Leucothaway, beautiful panicles of white flowers in the summer, and beautiful fall color. I also recommend, it's more bushy. American hazelnut also supports animals with nuts. Popular small tree redbuds are great for hedgerows. Various dogwoods or native dogwood trees. You have to get the bacterial disease resistant variety, but there's also additional species shrubs that are very great to use, especially Cornus serica. Serica, red twig dogwood, can get very tall and branchy. Also suggest elderberry, sambucus, beech trees, beautiful big beech trees. There's persimmon trees. They're a small to medium sized tree that creates small persimmon fruits that you can eat after they get very soft. There's also American witch hazel. If you love witch hazel, they bloom very early in the spring, and American witch hazel blooms, I believe in the fall. We also have sweet gum. These ones have star-shaped leaves and they're little fruits. The little burrs are great for birds and feeding birds. There's also serviceberry, a distant relative of other in the rose family, that has delicious little blueberry-like fruit. And there's also green hawthorn that also has little fruits for life. A big thing to look for is balancing in your hedgerow, like evergreen coverage, and then deciduous trees that support either with berries or high wildlife value by just being, such as oaks or maples. So you can form a very effective hedgerow by planting some of your deciduous, large or hardwood trees in the back, and then tiered, alternating evergreens right in front, and then smaller shrubs in front too. And then you have a very solid property line or hedgerow. And again, it goes a long way into supporting our plants. So a lot of resources that you can find a lot of this information and to do research, and the University of Maryland Extension is very helpful. There's the Center of Biological Diversity, biologicaldiversity.org. I find that very helpful for information. There is a native plant finder. This is in conjunction with a lot of the research, I believe, by Doug Tellamy. For some reason, Maryland's a little also has some issues in their coding. So use a nearby PA zip code. So use a zip code that's close to the Maryland PA line, and you will get a bunch of the best plants for pollinator and attracting host plants. Maryland Native Plant Society, a very great resource. It's for Missouri, but a very great plant finder online is the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder. They have everything planted there, and they provide a lot of wonderful information. More information on species and other resources can be found at the Maryland Biodiversity Project. Maryland Plant Atlas is very good for checking if it is technically native to our region. You can be flexible As a gardener, I'm very flexible. I don't always plant things that are completely native to Maryland, but I will plant something that is native to the East Coast. That's just me. Some people prefer to stick to what is just native for Maryland, while others are a little bit more experimental or allow some, flexibility there. So it's all up to you, really. There's also Baltimore Tree Trust. If you live in the Baltimore city line, you might be able to arrange free trees or be able to buy a tree for your property through there. There's also, again, it's not for Maryland, but it also has a bountiful information on a lot of things. The North Carolina Extension Gardener Plant Box has a lot of great information for research. I did include some places to purchase plants in the area and also mail order. There's Direct Native Plants, Ezell Native Plants, Kolar Nursery, Clear Ridge Nursery, Herring Run, downtown Baltimore, not far from Parkville, is very good. Chesapeake Natives, Atkins Arboretum does occasional plant sales. I'm not sure how COVID right now is affecting that, but they do plant sales. Elms Native Plant Nursery, Schatz Nurseries up here in Carroll County. And then also Lauren's Garden Service, a native plant nursery. She does wonderful designs in native plants, and also has a plant nursery where you can sell. So that's pretty much it. If people are watching in, and I know that was a lot of information. It was a lot of generalities. If people are watching and eager for questions, I'll be glad to take them, and I can discuss particular things for you. All right. Yes, let's see. We get a few quotes. Are hummingbirds also attracted to these plants as well? A lot of the plants that we mentioned are very great for our ruby throat hummingbirds. A lot of especially if you think red and think tubular. A lot of the Agasaki has, believe it or not, even though it's a mint relative, it has very tubular little mini flowers on all of that. They will attract, they definitely will attract hummingbirds. The honeysuckle will attract hummingbirds, especially due to the red color. A lot of the shrubs will also, you might see one visit one as well. There's some great other shrubs that I did not mention, like Aeschylus. It's, again, not technically native to Maryland, but it has become naturalized here. It's in the Buckeye family. Those may attract them. So yeah, many plants that are great for pollinators tend to be great for hummingbirds. You just have to remember that pollinators tend to go to two different types. There's generally two types of flowers. There's flowers that are pollen rich, like the hypericum, and then there's ones that are nectar rich, like the lobelia. So if you're ever in doubt, most nectar ones will attract the hummingbirds. So let's see, Nick Chilson, Arrowwood. Yep, that's a great wildlife value. That one is, I believe, dentatum, I think. Arrowwood viburnum is another one of our great viburnums. There are about half a dozen, I believe, viburnums that are native to this area, and they all are incredibly wildlife friendly due to the berries and great fall color for us. Very great plant. And there's ones, many of them have blue to like purple berries. There is one with red berries as well. And that might be the Arrowwood. And Jane says, thank you. How do we get a copy of the PDF? We will be figuring that out, and we will post that for you, probably on Facebook. So, because the PDF, I'm really proud of it, and I'd love to share it with everybody. All right. Any more comments? Wait a minute, see if anybody posts. All right, if there's no additional questions, we can probably wrap it up here. I'm very happy to have been able to share this. Again, if you have any questions, you can always reach me at Meber, M-E-B-E-R, at car.org for questions. And we additionally, in a few weeks, we have a wonderful plant seed a seed bomb take-home kit. There's my email below. Ta-da. And we also have a take-home kit that's coming. There are still some spots available to get a kit for seed bombs with native seeds inside that you can throw about your property or throw across your neighbor's property or anywhere you want to make your own seed bombs. So you can reserve. There's still a few spots available. You can reserve them here if you can see that in the chat. And please participate. We'd love for everybody to share and spread as many native plants as possible. All right. And it was very good talking to everybody today. I hope everyone has a great day.